Hey there, Velos here. This video is going to be on the zDH support Greater Rift build for patch 2.4.1. This build is optimized for high-level group Greater Rifts, where you're not dealing the damage, you are just increasing the damage the monsters take and reducing the damage that they deal. The build is going to take advantage of these group damage buffs and damage reductions available to the Demon Hunter, which there are quite a lot. And now that the wolf is a multiplier for the whole group, some version of this build is very likely to be included in the 4-player meta for Season 6. Now before I get into the setup, I want to mention that the exact itemization is somewhat flexible, a couple different versions of the setup, and what I have here is the foundation that I think is preferred, but the overall idea is the same. You just stack your damage buffs, damage reductions, and then get a bunch of toughness. Maintain 100% uptime on your wolf and other damage buffs, things like that. For kind of a more elaborate explanation and more alternatives, you can check out the Diablo fan text guide that I will have in the description below. For now, let's just jump into the skills and abilities. You can see them on the screen, and the itemization, everything is there, so you can just kind of, if you know what you're looking at, you can take that and it'll probably make sense. If not, I'm going to kind of go through each one and explain what it's doing. So Entangling Shot, Chain Gang, this is going to proc slow, and it's going to keep up your Odyssey's End buff from the cube for damage increase. And one thing about the Entangling Shot is it will refresh itself, so it lasts only 2 seconds, but if you cast it, it'll kind of like link to other monsters and refresh the timer and link back and forth. So as you're running around, you can kind of see in the gameplay, you kind of want to shoot the Entangling Shot from different angles to keep it on kind of everything or as many things as possible. And the priority is to keep the elites buffed with it. Multi-shot Wind Chill, pretty standard here. For the crit chance, this is going to debuff the monsters to have 15% increased crit chance for the whole group. You're going to combine this with the legendary gem Ice Blink, which is going to make it really easy to apply both of those effects. Vault, I'm using Action Shot, basically just to kind of aggro stuff while you're vaulting around and kiting. If you're scouting forward or behind, this is good to aggro them. And I didn't really have discipline issues. Mark for Death Contagion, this is going to be standard for the damage increase. You want to put it on a low health monster, that way it can spread around. And this one is 20% increase. The reason that we don't run Valley of Death or Grim Reaper, which I see a lot of people suggest, Grim Reaper first of all has lag issues, so when the damage is being divided around in high density situations, this is going to cause lag. On top of that, it's not actually a good source of damage increase, because the way that it works is the damage dealt to the single target is divided evenly among all the enemies in the 20-yard range. So the more monsters there are, the less damage it takes. So in high density situations, the supplemental damage offered from this ability is diminished to not very much. And then the Valley of Death, it's too small of an area, it's only 15% damage, so this one's not really ideal. Whenever you have a high density situation, there's pretty much monsters all over the screen, so the uptime, I mean, you could keep it underneath the elites and stuff like that, but this is just going to be better overall. Once it starts to spread, it's going to be on pretty much everything, and this does stack with the Mark for Death from the Calamity. So you can get both of those, each for 20% damage increase. Here we have the Wolf for the damage buff. This is why it's going to be important to take advantage of the Obsidian Ring and some amount of cooldown. You're going to want to have 100% uptime on this, which is not really hard to do when you're using the Obsidian and you're throwing out some multi-shots here and there. It's going to refresh. Sentry with Guardian Turret for the damage reduction. It's going to be a little bubble. It's going to reduce the damage that allies take in there. It's going to be important for you to keep this on top of the damage dealer so that they have that damage reduction. For passives, we got Custom Engineering for the additional duration on the sentries. This isn't really mandatory, but it's nice to just make the sentries last longer. There aren't that many passives that are high priority for this setup. The highest priority is going to be Numbing Traps. This is a damage reduction, 25%. Going to be really effective. These two combined gives you nearly a 50% damage reduction for the whole group. That's going to be really strong in terms of damage reduction. Awareness for the Cheat Death. pretty typical. And then Blood Vengeance, this one is also kind of flexible. You don't actually need it. I was running with Perfectionist for a little bit, but it's like you don't really need that either. So I mean, there's some flexibility on these passives. You can kind of run with a couple different ones and see what you prefer. The only one that's really mandatory is the Numbing Traps for the damage reduction. And then potentially Tactical Advantage is probably the next most valuable, but this you don't even actually need. Some setups I was considering dropping Vault altogether, and then wouldn't even have a proc for that, but anyways, for this setup, Tactical Advantage is really good. Numb Traps, and then Awareness. Custom Engineering, Blood Vengeance, potentially flexible. Quickly, I do want to mention the main reason that I am running Blood Vengeance is for the increased Hatred pool to keep the Aquila Cuirass up, because if I cast one multi-shot, I don't lose the buff, but if I don't have Blood Vengeance, I cast one multi-shot, I lose the buff. So having more maximum hatred is going to increase the threshold for you to keep that damage reduction buff. And because the Demon Hunter has so many options for damage reduction, I mean, you can see here when I use all of my abilities, I have 1.5 billion toughness. So I mean, toughness isn't really an issue per se, but you do kind of want to take advantage of the items that you're using. So that's the big reason I threw on Blood Vengeance, and I noticed that it definitely helped me keep the damage reduction buff up from that. That's the skills and abilities. Now we can go over the itemization. So here we have the 4-piece Unhallowed, and we're taking advantage of this for the damage reduction as well as the resource generation. And then we have the Aquila Cuirass for the damage reduction, the Hunter's Wrath for the attack speed on Chain Gang to increase the uptime on your Odyssey's End. We have the Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac for cooldown reduction, the Oculus Ring for the damage buff, Wraps of Clarity for the damage reduction, Hellfire Amulet for the extra passive, which this isn't really a high priority. You could run with an immunity necklace if you wanted. That definitely works. Again, some of the details here are flexible. Weapon, we have a Calamity. For the boots, we got the Illusory Boot. It's going to let you walk through monsters when there's really high density situations and you're trying to position yourself. It's nice to have these. We got the Rucksack for the additional sentries. This is going to increase uptime on your Guardian turret. So that's the itemization. I'm not going to go through the exact stat priority because it's not that important. If you want the full outline for the stat priority, you can refer to the text guide below. It's going to have everything laid out. I'm just going to kind of quickly mention some thresholds that you're going to want to meet, and that is around 50% cooldown reduction, and then as much resource cost reduction as you can get. Because as I mentioned, to keep your Aquila Cuirass up, you are going to need some hatred cost reduction. Otherwise, it's just instantly going to fall off as soon as you cast one multi-shot. So a few items with resource reduction, and then several items with cooldown reduction will get you to where you need. And these thresholds aren't really strict, it doesn't really matter, but that is kind of an optimized setup would be around these marks. Now we can briefly mention the cube powers and the legendary gems. So we have the Odyssey's End for the damage buff, 25% damage increase from everybody you hit with your Entangle. The armor, we have Ancient Parthon Defenders. This is potentially flexible depending on the setup. You could run with the Nemesis. And then for the jewelry, we have the Elusive Ring for the damage reduction. Now for the legendary gems, we have the Ice Blink. This is going to be a debuff on the monsters for 10% increased critical chance. So this is going to be a buff for the whole group. It's going to be really easy to apply with your multi-shot. Just one multi-shot, pretty much everything on the screen is going to be debuffed. And the duration of this is close to the same as the Wind Chill, so every 2-3 seconds you're going to want to throw out that multi-shot. Here we got the Gem of Vivacious Toxin. This is going to give 10% damage increase and damage reduction to the monsters, so just more damage amplifiers, damage mitigation. And then here we have the Esoteric Alteration for the personal damage reduction. Now we can talk about the Paragon points, and like I mentioned earlier, the value of Blood Vengeance. This is going to be the same reason that I have Hatred here. Because it's a support build, you're going to end up just dumping all of your Paragon into Vitality. And, I mean, survivability is not really an issue for the Demon Hunter. There's so many damage reduction options. It's nice to just kind of throw that Hatred in there, increase your uptime on the Cuirass. Because, I mean, like I said, if I drop out that Hatred, then the Cuirass is going to fall with just one multi-shot. So after the Hatred regen, we got the movement speed, and then you just dump the rest into Vitality. On the offense, the only thing that really matters here is the cooldown reduction. After that, attack speed is good to increase your uptime on your Entangle, and then it doesn't matter, crit modifiers. For the defense, all res, it's worth mentioning, once you have a lot of Vitality, the life percent becomes stronger, so just kind of, you know, whatever. Again, the toughness isn't really that big of a deal, so just kind of fill those out in whatever order. Here for the utility, resource cost reduction is going to be good, like I mentioned. For the Cuirass uptime, and then area damage you want to avoid in ZDPS builds because you're not the primary source of damage. Area damage is an additional calculation for the server to perform, and it causes lag, so avoid area damage, do not spend those points there. Get your resource reduction. Life on hit, sometimes you don't build with it, but it causes much less lag than the area damage. So that's it for the whole setup. Now I'm going to show some more gameplay, and I'm just going to kind of talk about some basic tips and things to keep in mind while you're playing the build. Pretty straightforward, it's not incredibly complicated. Basically you just run around, make sure that your debuffs are on the monsters, and I ended up with kind of a rotation to keep the Cuirass up. If I do one multi-shot and then generate twice, one multi-shot, generate twice, that's going to keep all of my damage buffs up, as well as all of my damage reduction buff. You're basically just spamming your Entangle on as many targets. Like I said earlier, you kind of want to hit them from different directions to spread it around, and then multi-shot, kind of take a few steps back, that way the cone is a little bit wider to hit more monsters. Make sure that your sentry is on top of the damage dealer. In this case it's probably going to be the wizard, and then if you're keeping your multi-shot wind chill up, you're going to be refreshing your wolf, so you're going to have 100% uptime on the wolf. And then the only other thing is Mark for Death Contagion. Put that on a monster that's about to die, and it will spread to everything else. Now I want to quickly glance over the Marauder setup, which I don't really recommend. I don't think is going to end up being preferred, just because the only real advantage of it is that you get the Boar, which is a group buff for 20% all res to the whole group, which is cool, but the thing is, it's another thing where it's more of a hassle than it's worth, because the wizard already has so much all res. 20% isn't really that much effective damage reduction, and honestly even the one wolf is kind of a hassle when you're trying to kite monsters and pull them in and position things. It's very tricky whenever you have AI body blocking them. You're trying to get them to follow you and they just stick on the wolf. And with a whole swarm of pets, it's just even worse. So I really didn't like the Marauder setup, and I don't recommend it. The pets really just get in the way a lot. And the damage reduction offered from the Zoe's Secret, you're basically breaking even with the Unhallowed, 60% damage reduction. Survivability is not the main issue for the Demon Hunter, not to mention you lose the Hunter's Wrath, so I just don't really recommend the Marauder. I don't think it's gonna be preferred, but it is there. It is worth considering. If your wizard is having survivability issues, you can consider picking up the Boar in addition to the wolf, but I do think something along these lines is going to be more preferred. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.